All right. Who wants to go first? While you think about your questions, how about if I get us started? Andy, we've talked a lot about the numbers that we like to throw out there because we are science-based and we have a lot of really good numbers. Aside from hiding behind the data and the numbers, what are some other common challenges that groups can face when trying to tell a good story? Are there other things that we could look out for?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges is people, they don't have the stories, that they don't bother to go out and get them. They feel that, we have the numbers, we have the data, that should be it. When you actually have to go out and talk to people face to face and get those stories so you have them to tell. My experience in working with nonprofits often would be that I'd be talking to the CEO or the executive director and I'd say, well, I'd like to get to know your organization. Tell me your favorite story about the difference you make in your community. And the person would respond, oh, stories. Hey, Paulette, do we have some stories? It's like they're calling off to the communications director or the marketing director, and it's like, here's the most powerful thing you have, and you don't already have a bunch in your back pocket. So I think the number one problem is just people just haven't bothered to collect the gold that's out there.
Hopefully we'll solve that or make some headway on it this afternoon at our workshop.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
We talked about boomers owning the majority of the property and the close family ties between boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials. But when we host landowner events, it's almost always, it seems like, the baby boomers in the room, and they're not bringing those heirs to those events.
Yeah.
How do we engage in such a way that we can get both the decision maker, the future decision maker, and the experts in the same room?
Yeah, I hear you, because boomers like meetings. We like meetings. We can look you in the eye and feel like we get something done and use our prodigious, body language skills and stuff. And Xers and millennials are more likely to say, what, a meeting? I got stuff to do. So my immediate response is meetings can be great, but when you're trying to reach those younger folks, I think the other things that have been discussed here, the social aspect, social media stuff, may be more effective than meetings. Hope that helps you.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So one of the concepts that keeps getting mentioned is this idea of a tribe and belonging to something, but that can tend to have a negative connotation as well when you get into the concept of tribalism, where a source being quoted by people who are in a different tribe can cause that source to lose all its credibility. The whole fake news idea where I'm not going to listen to anything that this person says because they've been quoted by someone I don't like. And in forestry, we tend to have a message that can get sensationalized to either extreme, or to many extremes, really, along the political spectrum. So how do we carefully formulate our messages to communicate that in that high-risk environment where we could lose credibility in an instant?
So great observation, and I couldn't agree with you more that you don't want to go out and publicly talk about trying to join people's tribes, right? But you're talking about that 14%, those existentialists on the right hand of the spectrum that are so tribal that they will reject any other messaging, right? And I think what you saw from Forest Proud, not only is it laden with values, their messaging, because I did some research before coming to learn about, my fellow presenters and was so impressed with so much of that messaging. But it's talking about the fact that forests serve so many purposes. There are different types of forests that present all kinds of different solutions, right? Then that increases your likelihood that you're going to be able to talk to multiple tribes, I think. Anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I was interested as I was preparing by some research that about people's reaction to the word environmentalist. And I think that, like tribe, is a word that can be negative. And millennials tend to reject labels of all kinds. And so sometimes it's a label that can turn people off. A word that feels like a label can alienate either end. Just a note.
And that actually goes both ways, right? You've talked a lot about the negative response to clear cutting. And what if you started calling it regenerative forestry? And I think you guys actually, I knew you laughed at that.
No, just eventually all paths lead to clear cutting when we have these discussions. So that's what I'm laughing at. And I think, which is actually a really good litmus test of have you created a position that you can defend and that people feel an opening to having a conversation. And I think you're right that, that there's two sides to the whole tribe deal. But when you try and build a tribe of people around solutions, not problems, that in and of itself kind of brings everybody to the conversation in a different way. And what's interesting is when I meet with folks in industry and right across the sector, they'll quite often say, why aren't you showing trees being cut in your content? And I'll stand there and we'll show them how many times it is actually in there. But it's showing up in a different context, so people don't see it the same way. So to me, I think the answer to your question is, you have to have a solid sort of brand positioning of the sector that you can stand behind, and that we, Ray, me, TJ, the staff, we're acutely looking at every single piece of content and saying, does this stay within our positioning or not? And if it's outside of that, it's going to appear, and that includes being inauthentic, it will immediately set off people's radar. So it's about having a strong position and sticking to it and then being consistent with it, and that position is about solutions, not about creating issues. I think that's the big part of how we've approached it.
And I would submit to you, or at least ask the question, whether it's fair to say that sometimes those solutions are inherently actually values that you share, right? If you're finding a solution to climate change, that speaks to one of your values. If you're finding a solution to healthy forests, if you're finding, whatever it may be, oftentimes behind that are values.
Yes, Joe.
One of our challenges now is recruitment and filling our open positions. I think the Generation Z that I've noticed, how do we reach the youngest people and attract them to careers in forestry?
One thing in general is that I think you pointed out that millennials say, I want to make a difference in the world. Gen Z is the youngest group that's coming out of college right now. We're just on the front edge of that group. They are much more likely to say, show me how to make a living and support my family. They went through 2008 and they understand the worldwide economy in a way. So when you go to them, you may want to talk in very practical terms about how the job supports the life they want to live, more than you talk to the millennials about that.
And I would say you have to meet them where they are, and you have to tell the story that appeals to them, and demonstrate that you're building strong relationships, right? It's a combination of all those things.
May I? The second video we saw hits both millennials and Gen Z so powerfully. I thought that was masterful. Thank you.
And as an aside, I'll let you know that we are building on our People of Forestry video campaign. We are adding blogs, more social media content, and we're going to debut a new activity book for 3rd through 5th graders to really get them young and talk to them about, hey, do you love being outdoors? You can make a career out of that. Did you know that there are all these careers available? So we'll tell you a little bit more about that tomorrow as well.
It's sort of a question, but and I'll give you a story. But the question is, how do we play catch up? And my oldest son now is 23 years old, but when he was in the 6th grade, and when I say catch up, how do we catch up after we've had our kids with textbooks that are written incorrectly, teachers that have a bias against forestry, and how do we make up that difference? And my quick story is, I pick up my son from school. I'm from North Carolina, the birthplace of forestry, right? In his social studies book, he's learning about renewable resources. And he said, Dad, because he knows I'm in forest products, Dad, they didn't list trees as a renewable resource. This is a North Carolina issued textbook, right? I said, well, Duncan, did you raise your hand and say something about it and correct him? He said, no, it was close to lunch and I was hungry. But my question is, we're playing catch. By the time we're getting to them on social media, we're way behind already. And have a bias that really put us, so how do we play catch up?
It's a good question. I mean, there's people like Project Learning Tree who are obviously trying to address that specific issue and curriculums and those kind of things. So there are ways to play catch up, but that's a longer term strategy than what I think you're looking for. Honestly, and this may surprise you, if I had to say the best possible way we're going to play catch up, it's mass timber and CLT, right? When I watch people, we're going to produce a fair amount of content on that in the next few months. And I can show you a video. To those who come this afternoon, I'll show you the kind of CLT video and animation stuff there. What CLT, and everyone knows what that is, hopefully, probably not everyone on the stage, cross-laminated timber. So this is a new product that's being used to build all sorts of buildings, but actually has the potential to build skyscrapers, right? So we're starting to build skyscrapers out of wood. That is a totally new conversation. And if you want to, it's not even playing catch up. That is the leapfrog that we have right now. When you listen to someone like Michael Green, we just made a video with Michael Green, talk about how he sees the future of cities through a lens of using wood and using nanotech and all these amazing inspirational new tools that are coming down the pike. We're not there yet. We don't have a whole bunch of CLT and mass timber buildings. But that generation, when they hear that story, get super excited. So I think, in a sense, what we have to do, and this is one way of dealing with a communications issue, where the most hardest thing to do in communications is to really reframe what people think about a sector or an issue, is just jump all the way ahead and say, look what's coming down the road. It ticks all the boxes we've talked about for millennials. They get super excited about those products. So that, for me, has become one of the #1 stories that we're trying to put out there, because it says, instead of trying to fight all these little battles in the background, let's just show people where the future is and where we're going as a sector.
And I would just say, sort of call back to the organ donation story that you saw earlier. I mean, all those stories people have in their heads about organ donation, those had a decade's head start on the modern story. But because they were able to tap into something that was just so deep and so resonant, keep your faith in story. If you can tell the right story, you can change the way people think. You can reframe the subject. So even if it's deeply ingrained, no pun intended, you can change the story.
And as several of you have pointed out, the opportunity is ripe right now. Environmentalism is very top of the mind for many of the generations. So it's something that we can take the opportunity and dive into now. Janelle?
The U.S. just keeps getting more and more diverse. So how do we appeal to and how do we build trust with the diverse populations that we're seeing within our country?
I still think you start with values, right? You're going to have common values that you can find with them. And if you can relate on that foundational basis and tell the right story that reaches to their values and can acknowledge the diversity of forests, right? I think that's the starting place. I think the diversity is a great thing.
Yeah, but I really see the issue that you're mentioning. I mean, I see it all the time in my work, because ethnicity and gender and generation are all layers of the same question, about diversity. I kind of can say a little bit about that from the generational point of view. When a group immigrates here, a group from a culture or a big family immigrates here, they will tend to behave in a certain generational way and have certain generational beliefs. And then the next generation behaves in a certain way and so forth, following this established generational cycle. So that there is a way to look into that nuance a little more deeply. And in my slides, actually, you'll see something about that cycle that might be helpful. It's a tough one. I know it is. Yeah.
I think in this sector, you just really have to name it and put it out there. And we have to own that we are not doing a good job yet on diversity. And I've had lots of conversations with people from a lot of different roles across the sector about this. The Forest Proud Board is going to be, I think, close to at least 40% women this year. We're really working on our own governance structure to try and address this. But what I will say, when it comes to developing content, it's a real challenge. We just shot a film up in Baltimore. It's all about what's going on there in terms of deconstruction and then using wood products from deconstruction to do all sorts of things. We had one glitch in the planning of the day, and all of a sudden we don't have the diverse faces that we wanted in our video, because if you look across this room and you look at the forest sector in general, we're not a diverse sector. So I'm glad you asked the question. I think it's something that everybody in the sector really has to pay attention to, because right now, if we would talk about playing catch-up, that to me is one of our biggest catch-up challenges. We really have a very long way to go to getting where we need to be with diversity, and that's something we're certainly focused on at Forest Brown.
I do have another thought about that. I was impressed when I was doing the research for today at the number across the population, the number of people who own forest land because of aesthetic, because of what that forest gives them, a refuge, peace, because of the way trees make them feel. And maybe there's something there that is shared across all of us, all groups. A thought.
More questions?
So, Mrs. Terri, you brought up Alan Alda, and I'm a big fan of him. And in the book that you mentioned, he talks a lot about empathy and how we as scientists or foresters can use that to relate to people we're talking to. I was wondering if you could maybe talk about empathy and how we can use that.
Absolutely. It's one of the scariest words in the dictionary for science-based people, right? The last thing you want to talk about is your feelings, for crying out loud, or some touchy-feely thing where you're demonstrating that you understand how they feel. But absolutely, empathy is powerful, right? If you can try to put yourself in the shoes of that landowner who you think doesn't like you, and can acknowledge what they're saying and say, I appreciate, I hear you. Now, can I share with you some of the reason that I came here, my reason for being here, why I think I have something to offer you? You know, that's kind of, I think, what you're talking about, and what we're often scared to say, I'll listen to you, or I can understand what you're saying, because then now we're acknowledging these wackos and what they believe, right? Not at all, not at all. Finding that common ground, showing that you care about how they feel, is part of making that connection. And it speaks to, so I was speaking with a gentleman from Oklahoma who has been interacting with Sierra Club. Is he here right now? Yeah. So I was so impressed. He said, the first time he was invited to speak to them, there were 40 Sierra Clubbers and him. And he said, yeah, this is pretty balanced. All right, we can do this. But because he was willing to show some empathy to say, I hear you, I understand you, thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective. And since then, how many years have you been engaging with them?
Several other times.
Okay. And see, but you got to have the courage to take that leap and to be willing to say, yeah, I do want to hear your perspective too.
And what's changed is there's still going to be that 14% or whatever you say, that you're never going to reach them. But there's more people who are a little bit more sane involved in the Sierra Club that are at least paying attention to us now, whereas in the 70s or where like that, they wouldn't even have anything to do with it.
And that brings up another point, 2 points actually. One thing I want to point out about the spectrum that I shared, that was not what percentage of the population are extremist or radicalized. That was specifically in relation to truth and how they view truth. For every issue, that spectrum is different, the number of extremists versus, so you would have to look specifically at the issue of forestry to understand what that percent is, but the concept applies. And one of the things we talked about is the fact that several of the once very radical activist groups are coming back toward the middle. Why are they doing that? Because they see the millennials and the Gen Zers listening to both sides. Suddenly their ultra-radical position isn't as effective. Look at World Wildlife Fund. They have dramatically changed their approach to things to reach out and work with those groups that they used to be so critical of, and say, we want to partner with you now. That's an opportunity.
Yeah.
You want to add to that?
No, you nailed it. That's right.
Great. I think we have just a couple more minutes before lunch, and I believe I saw one more question right around in here. Over here, Michelle?
Yeah, I just, listening to everything, I've constantly been struggling, I'm communications for Oklahoma, and I struggle with how not to leave that middle to older end of the baby boomers out. I mean, we get all so fixated on social media, and I'm concerned always, how do we continue to reach them while we're using all this simple social media to reach them?
Yeah, this is such a complicated time with technology having changed more rapidly in the last 20 years than we've seen it change perhaps in a million years, I don't know. But with all that change, we live in essentially a half-changed world. You know, it makes it tough because we may have to communicate 4 different ways to reach everybody. And ironically, you may need paper to reach that older baby boomer, because when a older baby boomer sees it on paper, it has authority, it matters, they take it seriously. Now, here's a fun fact to know and tell. Gen Z, the youngest generation, they've seen high-tech digital info all their lives. You want to get their attention? Paper. So it's interesting, but yeah, it's just hard because you have to may communicate in lots of different ways to reach them.
And so maybe those meetings, we can't get anyone but baby boomers to. We can take video of that, post it, or, you know, something.
Yes, because it's going to be hard to get them to come to meetings. Yeah.
I will just say, I think you just mentioned the magic word, which is video. If you, and all I do when I talk to people about video now is, 5 years ago when I was running a brand strategy firm, I wouldn't get people necessarily to spend their money on video because it was too early in that wave of where we've now got to. But if you just think on your own, everyone in this room, whichever one of those generations you're in, something goes wrong with your car, you're going to jump on YouTube and watch a video about, it's the first place we now go. And when you go on a website, the first thing you're going to do is you don't want to read through a bunch of stuff, right? You want to see a video that tells you what this company does, what this organization does. So I think, and the cost of producing really, really high production value videos has come so far down in the last 5 to 10 years. So if you're in the situation of thinking about where you're going to put your communications budget right now, the conversation I have with anyone starts off with, do you have a great story told in a video format that we can put at the front of everything you do? Because that is really becoming, I think, the primary first conversation that people have.
All right, we have one more question. They just gave me a 3-minute sign. Yes?
So how do we activate our, everybody in this room and all of our allies? I mean, even if you talk about your great numbers, with the thousands of people that are supported by this industry, we can't even get ourselves to share the stories, to do our likes and our shares and all of that. So how do we do a better job of activating ourselves before we start worrying about what other people are thinking?
So I'll offer one thought, and then I'll gladly hand it off. You all sitting out there, when you were asked if you're going to go jump on social media now, and no one raised their hand, right? Because what do you all think? You all think, I'm just one person. What difference am I going to make, right? That's a deadly attitude if you want to have an impact, right? Because one person can make, that's the beauty of social media and being online. One person can make a difference. And now you have Pound Forest Proud to rally around. Just go on and like those videos, and you're going to dramatically boost their exposure.
Yeah, I was going to say basically the same thing. It's like, be the change you want to see in the world. I mean, if you want other people to be telling stories, to be using social media, to be showing empathy, to be listening, etc., you do it, you model it, make sure everybody else sees you doing it, and they go, he's an unusually good communicator. I should start copying that. And if everybody does that, imagine this radiating out from over 200 people. So be the change.
Yeah, and always remember, too, that the first time you do that may not have an impact. People have to see things 6 or 7 times, I think studies show, and then they have an awareness of it. So if we just, to Andy's point, keep doing it, it can really radiate out.
Very good. Well, thank you to each of you for coming and sharing your expertise with us. I think all of our wheels are turning, and we've got some great ideas to start batting around and maybe make some progress there. So thank you very much.